Good evening and welcome to Speaking Truth to Power, a special event brought to you by Canadian Journalists for Free Expression and the Committee to Protect Journalists. My name is Nanava Duncan and I'm a board member at CJFE. While our event involves people from Canada and abroad, I want to take a moment to acknowledge the land that I'm on, the traditional territory of the Wendat Confederacy, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. We at CJFE are honored to have the privilege to live and work on this land and others and share what we have to offer. Now, before I introduce you to your host and your moderator for tonight, a few things to tell you. First, you can become a member of CJFE or donate by going to our website, cjfe.org. And while you're there, you can buy a signed editorial cartoon by Michael Deatter. You should really take a look at these works, even if you're not going to buy one. Proceeds of the sales will go to CJFE's work, and that is to defend free expression and media rights and to protect journalists through our Journalists in Distress Fund. Now, if you're tweeting about tonight, we highly encourage it. Please use the hashtag FreePress2021. That's hashtag FreePress2021. And for your questions during the panel tonight, you can use the chat function. I'm going to be back after the discussion to share those questions. And now I'm going to put you in the hands of our very capable host and moderator for tonight, kindly loaned to us from CBC Television's The National. Here is Adrienne Arsenault.
Hey there, Nanaba. Thank you very much. And thanks to all of you for joining us. We know the numbers are big and we're thrilled because this is a conversation we really need to have. This is Speaking Truth to Power. And the panel that they've lined up for you tonight is really extraordinary because we're going to talk about what it was like to cover events in the Donald Trump era, but crucially, what lingers in his absence, and to sort of assess the effects of the past 4 years on free speech and on media, not just in the United States, but around the world. So joining us will be CNN's fact checker extraordinaire, Daniel Dale, of course, a Canadian, NBC News senior correspondent, Ali Velshi, possibly also a Canadian, Washington Post senior producer, Kate Woodsome, an honorary Canadian, and award-winning photojournalist, Ed O, and of course, Canadian, and the free speech and civil liberties crusader, Jameel Jaffer, say it with me, yes, a Canadian. So we cannot thank you enough, all of you, for carving out time. To put everyone in the right frame of mind here, here's a little taste of what journalists covering politics in the United States have been up against. Let's have a look.
Since you are attacking our news organization, can you give us a chance?
Your organization
You are attacking our news organization.
Your organization.
Can you give us a chance?
I'm not going to give you a question.
Can you stay categorically?
You are fake news.
Sir,
go ahead.
Can you stay
Don't be so overly dramatic about it, Chuck. You're saying it's a falsehood, and they're giving Sean Spicer, our press secretary, gave alternative facts to that.
The dishonest media, which has published one false story after another.
We will never be intimidated by the dishonest media corporations, the fake news. They tell you it's fake news, it's fake.
I mean, you got to shake your head there, Daniel Dale. You're great at fact-checking this. The president offered no evidence.
It's almost too stupid to fact-check.
Anderson, this president is a serial liar, and he serially lied tonight. I counted preliminarily more than 20 false or misleading claims.
Look. You know you're a fake. You know that. Your whole network, the way you cover it, is fake. I wish we had a fair media in this country, and we really don't. Here we go. Same old group.
You're not looking for rumors.
I'm the president, and you're fake news.
Rein in Robert Mueller.
What a stupid question that is. You ask a lot of stupid questions.
Why don't you act in a little more positive? It's always trying to
My
get you.
My question to you is...
Get you.
What do you say to Americans who are watching you right now who are scared?
I say that you're a terrible reporter. That's what I say. Go ahead. I think it's a very nasty question.
Don't talk to me that way. You're just a lightweight. Don't talk to me that way. I'm the president of the United States. Don't ever talk to the president that way. All right, I'm going to go with another question. Go ahead.
Okay, I don't know if anybody else is reaching for the Tums. I am. To start us off with an overview of the Trump era of journalism, which is important to talk about because it did not end with his presidency. Let's bring in Daniel Dale, Ali Velshi, and Kate Woodsome. So thank you to the three of you for stepping up. First off, we just saw Donald Trump at what is arguably his bullying best. And in your own ways, you all stood up to that. But I'm curious about what that did to your ability to report the story. Kate, let's start with you.
I've never covered Trump in the White House, but I have covered Trump supporters, and so I've been at his rallies, with groups of voters who are totally dedicated to Trump over the past 4 years. And over the 4 years that Trump was in office, there was a change in the sentiment and that the way that people would welcome me and my colleagues. And so initially, when you're in the field, everybody's kind of curious about a reporter, particularly reporters with cameras. And that would change over the years from curiosity to disdain, making it a lot harder to ask questions and to feel practically safe in the field. I'll just say when Trump first came to office, I was working at Al Jazeera English, and most of my colleagues are Muslims. And there was a deep fear within the newsroom about the reprisals that they might face in the field because of a president that had been campaigning on anti-Muslim sentiment. And so immediately with the election of Trump, we began to have conversations about security that we had never had before.
So Daniel, you were featured in that obviously that montage because your 4-year-long hallucination was fact checking, and I'm wondering, aside from how's the liar liar pants on fire beat going for you under Trump, how did those lies evolve in both their nature and then the impact of them?
So the frequency got larger and larger over time. I started this as kind of a side project, counting all the president's false claims. It was about 3 per day in 2017. And by 2018, it was 9 per day. I think the magnitude of them, the importance of them also increased over time. I think they were always significant, and they always did real harm to particular people, communities, and to U.S. society more broadly. But I think the two most consequential lies were both really lie campaigns, and they both came at the end. It was the lie about, the family lies about the virus, the pandemic, saying this virus that was out of control was under control and that it was going away. And then the lie that he won the election that he lost, which we've seen has done real damage to U.S. democracy. And so I think they're very tangible harms. And then I think the broader harm is that, when you watch a montage like that, the problem isn't that like our feelings are hurt, like, oh, this guy's being mean to us. It's that kind of behavior inspires millions of average people to believe that we are the enemy, to believe that we are deliberately making things up, to believe that we are constantly lying. And so, as hard as I could try to fact check, and I think it was useful, I always knew that there were more and more people, probably tens of millions of people who were completely inaccessible to me at work. And I think that a real long-term problem I don't know how to solve, the existence of this larger and larger group that thinks that, we are the serial liars and not the politicians who are actually serial lying.
Okay, so let's poke at that a little bit, because I think at the beginning, as an observer at the beginning of the Trump era, there was a reluctance to call him out. You were doing it with the fact checking. That was a beat for you. People sort of cleaved out their traditions, right, of objectivity and balance. And how did that shift over time, Ali?
Well, it's an interesting question because two things were going on at the same time. One is, as journalists, we have to bear witness, tell people what's happening and watch it and see it, and then we have to hold power to account. So what Daniel was doing was bearing that witness, right? What reporters in the field or at those events were doing was bearing witness, and then others of us were trying to hold power to account. The fact that it happened under a Republican president caused people to think that the media was against them, but we've never experienced this before. We needed to fact check a president, regardless of what their position was. So fact checking bearing witness to Donald Trump and then reporting accurately but negatively on him, because that's what it was. When somebody's lying all the time, it's going to seem negative. Created an impression that we're against Trump, as opposed to we're against lying. We're against, things that they were telling us they were doing that weren't true. It was fascinating. Just yesterday, I think I was listening to the coronavirus task force briefing from the White House. And my first thought when I was listening to it is, this is a little bit boring. It's got facts and statistics and details, and there was no lies to catch. Or at least no obvious lies to catch. So it changes you. It changes the way you think about things. At the beginning of the Trump administration, when we would hold this administration to account, people would say, you're on the other side. You're against them. You're engaged in pitched battle with the administration. It's like, no, we're just engaged in pitched battle with lies. The fact that Donald Trump happens to have been the one saying it doesn't make it about him or the Republican Party. I will say that all the little lies that Daniel's been fact-checking for a long time lead up to the big lie. And the big lie was the January 6th lie. And Timothy Snyder at Yale has done a lot of work on this. But the idea that once you've softened everybody up for the fact that the media is lying and I'm the only one telling you the truth, why stick to the little lies? Why not go for the big lie? I won the election. They're lying to you. So it's very, very corrosive to democracy. And I'm not sure how we back out of this one.
Well, so we have to figure that out, though. Kate, I have seen you talk about those divisions that Ali discusses as the idea that political tribalism is no longer an adequate phrase for it. So what is?
Yeah, I mean, what social psychologists and even neurologists are looking at right now is political sectarianism. And this is when you hate the other group more than you love your own. Mm-hmm. Political parties often and groups, sports teams, etc., are usually motivated by a love of your tribe or your group. But we're now so divided and have fallen into a pattern of othering the other side that some politicians, some people are motivated by a hate of the other, and they do things to spite or undermine the other group. And so, you see this for some members of the Republican Party after the Capitol attack. The collective concern was America. But ultimately, some members of the Republican Party are concerned about their own reelection. And so they might be doing and saying things that are to spite Democrats, and instead of doing them to address the concerns facing the country. It's interesting. There's always this tension, right, between politicians and the media. This didn't start with Trump. And you saw it too with Sarah Palin when she used the phrase gotcha journalism when asked a really simple question, I think, about what newspapers she reads or what media she reads. And that, I feel, was in some way teeing up this idea in recent history that the media is trying to make certain politicians look stupid. And Sarah Palin, was essentially, for a lot of people, a salt of the earth kind of a politician, salt of the earth kind of woman. And some people could see themselves in her, just as Trump appealed to this populist base that, even though he's a rich businessman, he's also one of the people. And he framed the media as the liberal elite media and gave kind of a name and an idea that the media is arrogant, liberal, they look down on you. And when you feel bullied, when you feel victimized, you're going to look at that person as the enemy. And so in this idea of political sectarianism, the media too has become the other to the Trump tribe.
So just for this first block, this one last question, I just want to go to that point you just made, because is there something to that claim, though? Because as you said, this didn't start with Trump. It was Obama's Justice Department, right, that tapped reporters' phones, that dragged reporters into court, that prosecuted 3 times as many cases targeting leakers than all the previous administrations combined. And so I'm wondering which one is actually more of a threat to journalism. Daniel, can you take this last question for this block?
Well, I think it's all bad. I mean, I think as journalists, we stand against, certainly the subpoena, prosecuting of journalists for doing journalism, and we rely on leakers in the public interest and publish their information. So yeah, I think as journalists we stand against some of what the Obama administration did. We also stand against the demonization of journalists as the enemy, as fake news, against the idea that we are out to get any particular group. So I don't think we have to make a choice. I think we can stand against all of this.
It's all a sliding scale. So, all right. So that's kind of the high helicopter view. Now we need to get, roll up our sleeves and get down to what this has been like for all of you on the streets, particularly what reporters encountered during these last few years. We're going to bring in another guest for that, but just for a bit of a taste of what reporters encountered largely during the summer and the Capitol riots, let's have a look at another piece of tape.
I just want to remind you, nobody was doing anything. Back up, back up, back up, back up.
Come on, they're shooting at us.
Okay, they're shooting, guys.
Let's go.
Put your helmets on.
Am I hearing that right?
All right, guys, I got hit. Yeah, I got hit. Hold on.
Are you okay?
I'm getting shot. I'm getting...
Kate?
Rubber bullets. It's okay. It's those pepper bullets. Bullets.
Who are they aiming that at?
I don't know.
Do they not know that obviously they see the camera?
I'm sorry? Okay. Do you mind telling me why I'm under arrest, sir?
That is an American television reporter, Omar Jimenez, being led away. The camera is being walked away. Yeah, this is the police carrying our camera right now, frankly not aware that it's still rolling.
I was lining up a photo, and then my world kind of exploded. So I immediately realized that I'd been hit in the face with something, and my face started to swell, and there was too much blood I couldn't see. So I just closed my eyes and started yelling, "I'm pressed, I'm pressed, I'm pressed, I'm pressed." Police deliberately took me, pepper spray on my face, and then put me in zip ties. I'm in the back of a cop car right now.
The cops, I saw them shaking their pepper spray bottles and actively attacking us. I filmed this, and that was the one factor that I didn't really see that coming.
And we fight. We fight like hell. And if you don't fight like hell, you're not going to have a country anymore.
The police are now running back into the Capitol building.
Protesters tore down Pelosi's nameplate.
The government did this to us. We were normal, good, law-abiding citizens.
Whether or not this was actually carrying... You know what?
The Washington, get the out of here. Yeah, get the out of here. You.
Okay, so murder the media, that is not just a slogan, but it was written on the doors of the Capitol. It seems to be a subset of the Proud Boys. We're going to talk about that, but I really want to bring in Ali, who, as you saw there, was shot in the knee with a rubber bullet, Kate, who was hit by those tear gas pellets, and then an extraordinary journalist, Edo. If you have not seen Ed's work, my plug here is to go seek it out, because Ed, you are a hell of a journalist, and it's you who had that bloodied face. And I'm just curious. I have heard you say in the past that you didn't expect that you have been covering, conflict around the world, but that in the United States you didn't expect. Walk me through that thinking.
Well, I think, working in the Middle East, so I spent most of my career working in the Middle East, specifically in Cairo and Yemen, Somalia, Iraq. And there, perception is everything. So you have to really project yourself as we're here, we're neutral, and we're not here to intervene. And, these are authoritarian countries where that freedom of the press is not respected. And so when I moved to the States to cover news here, I had this perception, this understanding that well, of course the police won't mess with journalists if you just don't go in the middle of anything, if you just show that you're definitely a journalist and you're neutral, like you will be left alone. And, when I was hurt in Minneapolis, actually with Linda, who was like right next to me, I played out in my head as journalists, like we think like, what mistakes can we do differently? Can we improve on, like, where were we in the wrong spot? Were we like, did we like not think about our exits? And the one thing in that case was, no, we were just targeted by the cops. And that's it. And so that was like a realization to me that the dynamic in the States has really changed. And it's really sad because if it can happen here, America leads the way, the world in a lot of ways in, press freedom, in an open society and democracy. And as that is compromised, that's going to have a knock-on effect it's going to rationalize why the Egyptians, the Saudis, the Turkish government, the Chinese can get away with the same thing. And I think it's really sad.
So to be targeted by the cops, that's the thing that feels new, I think, for a lot of people. And Ali, you seem to be saying similar things. What does that change for journalism now?
Well, Ed and I were we both got attacked the same night, actually, in Minneapolis. I saw him the next morning or the next day. We were together reporting, and it was remarkable. I mean, the number of journalists who were attacked over the course of those few days by authorities. As journalists, we all have a go bag, right? A thing that you can run off with if you get dispatched somewhere. Then I cover a lot of hurricanes, so I've got I've got a separate bag for hurricane. Now I have a civil unrest bag. I've got a gas mask that works with our microphones. I've got a bulletproof vest, which I had never worn in America prior to last May. We've got hardened helmets and things like that. That incident you showed where I got hit, and I got hit below the knee, so it wasn't terribly damaging, but we'd been hit by police, and there was sort of a lot of confusion around there, and there was tear gas. And I don't know whether they knew they were targeting press. They probably should have, because we were close enough that they could see I had a tall photographer with a camera. And, I don't know if they did or they didn't. But as we backed off of that intersection that you showed in the video, we got to another intersection. And by now they'd been gassing the crowd for a while. So anybody without a helmet or without a face mask for tear gas wasn't able to be there. So it was just us as media. We approached the intersection. This is retreating. And police pulled into that intersection with the National Guard as well. So having just been hit, we put up our hands and we said, we're media. And they said, we don't care. And they fired again. Mm-hmm. So that time, I'm 100% sure they were actually aiming for us. Strangely, having aimed for us, they didn't hit us the second time, but they actually did target us. So to Ed's point about what could we have done differently? Nothing but be the media. But if we have to bear witness, which is what we do, you cannot hold power to account if you don't know what you're holding them to account for. So we needed to be there. And it is really convenient and terrific for politicians who don't like the media and for police who think the media is interfering with them to clear the media out, to have curfews that they want the media to observe, which we are not under obligation to observe. But if you don't observe a curfew, you might get arrested. Or in the case of Ed and me, you will get struck with something. And that is that goes through your mind, and it becomes very difficult to start to reconcile that.
So if you're in a situation where you feel like you're being targeted by the cops, but you're also being, villainized by a large segment of the population, how do you must have to adjust how you even interact with people. Kate, to what extent have you had to change everything about how you approach people, how you talk to them, how you do your job?
Yeah, I just want to clarify one thing. I wasn't the Kate that was hit by a tear gas pellet or canister.
My bad.
So
I'm sorry.
No, I just want to clarify that. I was at the Capitol, which is what you saw when someone asked me, who do you work with? And I identified myself as I'm with the Washington Post, and then was berated and accused of contributing to the death of one of the rioters inside of the Capitol, and was essentially swarmed by a group of people who were calling me and other journalists traitors, essentially, following this rhetoric of enemy of the people. And what was very different than I'd ever experienced in this was what I can only refer to as delusion. They were so fervently committed to this idea that the election had been stolen, and that journalists were traitors, and journalists were on the other side of what they considered to be a coup. And so this was not just a situational danger, which I have been in the past. I started my career in Cambodia, which is not the Middle East that Ed has reported from, but there were situational danger where I knew that I had to take certain precautions to protect myself, but I was never targeted. Now, in this era, being considered a traitor by somebody who is operating with a different set of I don't want to say a different set of facts, a different reality. It has made me change what I do, and it was actually the Capitol attack that caused a rethink for some in the newsroom. Do we identify ourselves when we are asked who we are reporting for? Because now saying I work with the Washington Post puts me in direct danger for people who have been hearing for years that, the Amazon, Jeff Bezos, Washington Post is the enemy of the people. And so I think twice before identifying myself. I have to assess, is this a group of people or potentially a mob? Because a mob has a very different mentality than just a group of people where there's a lack of accountability and personal responsibility, and it just becomes this mass. Other things, at the Capitol attack, I was wearing a flak jacket. We don't normally go out in flak jackets. My lesson from that was, don't wear your flak jacket on the outside of your coat. Have a coat that's big enough so that nobody can see it. That was my baptism by fire. And I won't make that mistake again. You can't hide a camera, but there are subtle things that you can do to protect yourself in these situations. I'd love to learn
just to show
Ed, actually.
Well, I was actually just going to say, like, without revealing, the dangers to your own selves, are there tips you can offer people in this moment, Ed, in particular, for how they can look after themselves?
Well, I think, we've gotten so far in this country that, like, we need to take a really long and hard look as to how journalists are perceived. I think about my work in the Middle East, it is life or death. Like, when I am working in Gaza or Lebanon, I know there's an Israeli drone flying overhead during a conflict, and just literally the way that I act, the way that I'm perceived, might make them think that I'm a militant, and that could give them an authorization to strike. And so it's with that neutrality in mind that I'm just like, how are we perceived? Because perception is absolutely everything. And I think the bigger question we have to ask now, besides, like, do you wear a flak jacket inside or outside? Do you identify yourself as press? Do you wear a lanyard? The bigger thing that we need to repair is our perception. And, we hold power to account by bearing witness. But I think one thing that's been really difficult in this Trump era is that commentary has really overtaken on the ground reporting. And because of Trump, there's just so much work that we have to do to, like, disprove things. But I would say the wider thing is, if we can give journalism back to the people who would attack us, to make them understand and feel reflected in the work that we do, and really make a distinction between, like, on the ground reporting and just showing that we're definitely neutral, and being a bit more judicious with the way that, not taking sides, not looking like we're partisan. If we can do that to convince the people who would attack us that, no, we're trying to tell your story, we're trying to show your truth, and we're trying to show what your concerns are, I think it's kind of like, we just need to get back to the basics. And I think, as to Kate's point, as the American media becomes really siloed in, like, right-wing media, left-wing media, like, I don't make those distinctions. We need to kind of, like, just go back to truth and stop making these, like, confusing the audience as to, like, what's opinion and what's, like, just us bearing witness. And I think that's something that we all have to do. And it's a bit too easy to blame one president for it, because this is a wider thing that we really need to repair.
Okay,
Yeah,
excellent answer. Go ahead, Kate.
Oh, I think you said it so beautifully. And the task we have right now is regaining trust. And, not all of it is our fault, but we all have the responsibility of being essentially individual ambassadors of journalism and of the media. And so the approach that I've been taking, particularly in reporting about Trump supporters is to have civil conversations with them, which, over the past few years now, I've essentially been doing interviews with people about what they believe and why they believe it. And I'll offer, a counterpoint based in fact, but I won't degrade or make fun of or, cast them as a basket of deplorables, which, that still is echoing in many people's minds. And what I've found in the aftermath of these conversations is this stereotype that people have of me begins to melt away. And it's individual conversations that begin to reorient this idea of the media, and also for some reporters, the idea of who or what a Trump supporter is. And this is, I think, happening in families across America. We've lost the ability to have civil conversations. And so it's kind of checking your bias and figuring out, am I making this person into more of an enemy than they actually are? And some people will say, yes, they're an enemy, but others, it's like, are we feeding this machine for clicks, or are we doing it to better understand each other as humans?
Okay.
So if I could just get in there for a second, I love you guys, but I couldn't disagree more with this. I've done nothing but be outside for the entire time. All I do every week is I talk to Americans. I'm out there having civil conversations. It's way beyond what we can fix. It is the BS that people believe I can't fix. I've taken to going with printouts of death tolls of coronavirus. You can't fix it. They think that the media are baby-eating demons. Yesterday on Fox News, Eric Trump was blaming Democrats for the power outages in Texas. You can't, there was a problem that I think we were all responsible for, and we need to take responsibility for. It will not fix this problem. The velocity at which lies spread on the internet for political gain is not something that Kate and Ed and Adrienne and Daniel and I can fix. Daniel, all he does is tell you about the lies, and they're not reading that stuff. So I'm out there every week. I'm not giving up on civil conversations. I make sure that I speak to individual Americans who do not hold office. They just have views, and they're from different places on the political spectrum. Once you get past a point on the right, this is an unfixable problem.
Okay, but we have to start talking about how to fix it, because we can't just accept that it's broken and we're done. So let's start looking at free speech, at the internet, is all the misinformation, the lies. We have another little bit of tape to set the scene. Let's have a look at that.
Tonight, Twitter silenced Trump permanently, suspending his account after more than 25,000 presidential tweets, citing the risk of further incitement of violence.
Twitter CEO Jack Dorsey addressing the ban on President Trump in a series of tweets. He said the decision came down to public safety, and that offline harm as a result of online speech is demonstrably real.
Mark Zuckerberg is saying in a post that, quote, "We are extending the block we have placed on his Facebook and Instagram accounts indefinitely."
What is needed now is for us to listen to one another, not to silence one another.
The government wants to bring in a law that forces Facebook and Google to pay media outlets when they republish their content. Google has conceded, signing deals with several media outlets, but Facebook has not.
There is a lot of world interest in what Australia is doing. I invite, as we did with Google, Facebook to constructively engage, because, they know that what Australia will do here is likely to be followed by many other Western jurisdictions.
Okay, so we are about 12 minutes away from starting to take your questions. Write them down, send them in. And while you do that, we do need to talk about the lasting effects on the media, and can this happen to other democracies? And so this is why we're bringing in Jameel Jaffer. You are a civil liberties lawyer, an expert on free speech issues, tireless advocate for human rights, and Daniel Dale. So the pair of you, we need your help with this. Jameel, I think crucially for you to begin with, what do other countries need to watch for to ensure that this cloud doesn't flow, say, north?
Yeah, I mean, I think that part of it does have to do with the social media companies, which obviously operate not just in the United States but around the world. And it's always been true that politicians lie. It's always been true that people get things wrong on the people get things wrong. What's new now is this new communications technology that underlies public discourse, and I think that some of the blame for the problems that we have been discussing over the last half hour, some of the blame has to lie with the social media companies that have business models that amplify extreme speech and sensational speech. That's the way that these social media platforms make money. They keep people's attention, and the way they keep people's attention is to amplify all kinds of speech that causes democratic harms. And I don't want to put all the blame on those companies. I think that Trump certainly deserves a large part of the blame here. But those companies' business models have a lot to do with the polarization that we're seeing in the United States right now, and that maybe we're starting to see in other places as well.
So, given that they've done that, though, I mean, is there not a worrisome precedent here to start banning? Daniel?
A worrisome precedent to start banning people?
Mm-hmm.
I should be careful not to. I think I should not express an opinion on this because I don't think CNN would want me to. But I can say from a fact checker's perspective, whatever you think about it in principle, I think we've seen that deplatforming is effective in reducing the reach of bad misinformation spreading actors. And again, that's not me endorsing it as something the company should do. But you see it even with former President Trump. He issued a statement the other day on a Supreme Court decision about a New York investigation into his tax and financial dealings. And you really had to look for that statement on Twitter because he was not on Twitter. And so he had to rely on these intermediaries, journalists and others, to post it. And many of them, I didn't post it. You see people there's a gentleman named Milo Yiannopoulos who's associated with the racist alt-right, who was kind of omnipresent. He was everywhere saying racist stuff, saying untrue stuff. He was banned, and then he was just kind of gone. Barely a factor at all in the discourse. And so regardless of the free speech implications, I think it's been kind of a surprise to me how effective it can be just to get rid of people from certain platforms and say, you can talk, but talk elsewhere.
I mean, Jameel, Adrienne, is there a danger though? Go ahead.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that when it comes to this question of deplatforming Trump or other political leaders that engage in disinformation or incitement on social media, I think it's actually a pretty complicated question because on the one hand, you have these platforms that have a huge amount of power over public discourse online. They're essentially gatekeepers to the public square. And we don't want them to ultimately have control over who gets to speak and who doesn't get to speak and which ideas get heard and which ideas don't get heard. On the other hand, you can't expect Twitter or Facebook to keep allowing President Trump to use their technologies in this particular way, especially when Trump is using those platforms to incite other people to immediate violence. So I actually think that the social media companies got this mostly right. I think that they were right to keep President Trump's speech up for so long. I think that the public needed to see that speech, that we learned a lot about the president because of his tweets. Often what we learned was horrific, but we wouldn't have learned it but for the tweets. But at a certain point, when the president started using the platform to incite people to immediate unlawful activity and immediate violence in particular, I think that the social media companies really had no choice. I don't think it makes sense to focus solely on this question of deplatforming. Again, as I said earlier, I think a lot of the problem here comes not from the platform's decisions to have Trump on or not have him on, The problem comes from their algorithms that amplify certain kinds of speech, sensational speech and extreme speech, and marginalize other kinds of speech. And that, I think, has a really corrosive effect on public discourse. I don't think the solution is banning, I don't think banning Trump is a solution to that problem, or banning 100 other people would be a solution to that problem. I think that's a much deeper problem. But I think that's where our attention should be now.
And Daniel, can you walk us through, when we talk about the algorithms and when you talk about the giants like Facebook, everyone has been watching what's been happening in Australia. The news feeds disappeared, and then there was a compromise reached. What are you watching for in that, and what do other countries find themselves chewing their nails over about Facebook right now?
It's hard to know how that plays out. So I'm just watching, I think as a news consumer, to see how this is resolved and what the consequences of that outcome are. I think countries, governments, as well as journalists, have been slow to appreciate the impact of social media. I think the QAnon phenomenon in the U.S. and elsewhere has driven home just how radicalizing some of these platforms, perhaps especially Facebook, can be. And it's not kind of a passive thing. Oh, Facebook exists and people are consuming stuff. It's in part, choices that these companies have made in terms of, what to promote and to who, what kind of forums to create for people, like, private groups, for example, on Facebook, initially seemed to be kind of a benign thing, turned out to be a real forum for radicalization when promoted a certain way and used a certain way. And so, governments are hesitant to go to war with this kind of entity and their free speech and political freedom implications of all this. But, there are also harms too. And so I'm curious, over the next 5-10 years, will we see a real regulatory effort in some countries, or, are these entities too powerful and too complicated to try to tackle head on from a political perspective?
And Jameel, I think about how the language might shift if we were talking about, I was having a conversation with Ed earlier about the ways in which Facebook and Twitter were utilized by young people in the Arab Spring, and how, his point was extraordinary, right? That they needed it. They desperately needed those platforms, and the language would have been very different if we were talking about other places where people had been stripped from access to those platforms. Is there a bit of a blind spot here in journalism, you think, in terms of the way people describe deplatforming?
Well, I mean, I to say that deplatforming Trump was a good idea is not the same thing as saying deplatforming anyone is a good idea, right? It may depend on who they are and why they're being deplatformed. I do think that there is the danger of sort of throwing the baby out with the bathwater here. I think that these social media companies, are many different things. One of the things that they are is a very powerful organizing tool for dissidents, political dissidents, who wouldn't otherwise be able to connect with one another. And that's what we saw in the Arab Spring, but that's, we see it all the time, even now with Me Too or Black Lives Matter. I mean, these are movements that wouldn't possibly have existed without social media. So, all of that is great, and, great for democracy and worth preserving and worth protecting against regulatory efforts, misguided regulatory efforts that would crush it. But social media is not only that, it is also having this deeply corrosive effect on our democracy by, pushing people into filter bubbles, insulating them from, counter speech, views that are different from their own, radicalizing people in these, in the ways that we've already discussed. And those are, those are things that can be addressed through public policy. There are ways of getting at those problems. Remains to be seen whether governments like the Canadian government and the American government will regulate in this sphere in a way that is sort of, that makes sense and doesn't crush the things that we all want to preserve. But I do think that regulatory interventions here could address some of the problems that we've been discussing.
Okay, excellent. Thank you, Jameel, Daniel, Ed, Ali. That's our Canadian gang over there, and Kate, our honorary Canadian. Thank you very much for your insights. I don't want to monopolize any more of your time with my questions. This is a moment for us to get some questions from you in the crowd, wherever you may be. Nanaba, I think you have been collecting them, right?
I have. So I'll start with our first one. We've got two questions from Alessia and Annie. They've got a similar question. They want to know, quote, new journalists emerging in this field, as new journalists emerging in this field, how can we go about protecting ourselves while remaining dedicated to holding politicians to account? I'm thinking maybe, Adrienne, that Ed O can start us off on this one.
Yep, that sounds like a good idea, Ed.
Well, I think, one thing that, that protecting yourself right now, it's reporting here is really fraught. I would say one thing is like, be really digital savvy, learn about encryption, know how to, hide yourself from the internet so that you don't get doxxed. I think just know and act in a way that like you are neutral all the time. Be really careful on social media, how you act, like be careful not to express too many, political opinions, and just like know that the one thing that's keeping us safe is this, again, perception of objectivity. So if you can protect yourself in that way, I think a lot of the threats coming in now are mostly from online, and that unfortunately can sometimes bleed into a very physical reality. And so really understand, like, how do you separate your personal life from your professional life, and just be really careful what you post. But then more than that, when it comes to protecting yourself from the government, because you never know which administration is going to change, what policy is going to be in effect later on, use Signal, get your sources to use Signal, and just be really aware that, something that you put on record now in an unencrypted platform might completely come back to haunt you. For example, right now, like everyone I know is on Clubhouse. And honestly, I'm really skeptical of this app that shares all my contacts and puts it in one place. So I think that's the nature of like a lot of the digital threat, is just thinking like, what are the policies now, and how would they ever turn bad like 10 years from now if there's another administration, another change in this world? And I think that's the digital side. And then on the physical end of like how to just comport yourself, just be empathetic, and just listen more than talk. And I hope that people will see kind of the humanity in what you're trying to do and bear truth as a journalist.
Always a good answer. Listen more than talk.
Yes,
Do you have another one?
Yeah. And Ed, we can talk about Clubhouse later. I think I have a lot of reading to do, but I love it. Okay, so this is another journalist question. This is from Debbie. As someone who strives to provide balanced reporting, how do you frame dangerous views? For instance, how do you talk about climate change denial in a way that doesn't lend these beliefs more credence than they deserve?
Kate, that feels like a question for you.
It was
2021
covering Trump supporters because they would carry a lot of misinformation, and so we ended up not giving people a free platform. Every interview or every story that we did had to be, as Daniel does so well, had to be fact checked within the package, within the interview. Either we would build the fact checking into the question, and then follow up almost like a fact sandwich, or we would provide a shortened clip of them, hopefully not taken out of context. We work extremely hard to give the full context of what they're saying, but then to explain that the reality may differ from what they believe. So it's just very active and sometimes contained reporting of positions that aren't true.
Ali, do you want to add anything to that?
That's a perfect description of it. I don't think you can keep your viewers from understanding that there are people who believe other things. I don't think that's healthy. I think there were a whole lot of people who didn't understand why there are 74 million people who voted for Donald Trump. But when people are saying things that are provably false, you have to say so. There's no neutrality in that.
Okay. Next question.
Yeah. So we're going to take away. We're going to move it away from the personal responsibility of journalists for a moment to a higher level. Emmanuel wants to know, what is the role of the media corporations in this? The chasm between the left and right that feeds division.
Ooh, Jameel, I feel like that has your name written all over it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think that I'm not sure the answer is the same in the United States as it is elsewhere in the world, but at least in the United States, I think that certain media companies bear a huge part of the responsibility for polarization, and not just polarization, but for the fact that so many Americans believe things that are demonstrably not true. Fox News in particular has been hugely influential, if that's the right word, in that particular context. But the combination of the Fox News and similar media organizations, Trump, and the social media platforms, I think, have been just terrible for the United States, terrible for American democracy, terrible for political discourse. I agree with what was said earlier, that it's not obvious at all how we move forward from where we are now.
And I would add to that point, it's not just Fox. I mean, you have ABC and other networks, including CNN, et cetera, that are providing a platform to members of Congress who are recycling what is now commonly referred to as the big lie about the election being stolen, which it was not. It was democratically carried out, and we have a clear president. But because news programs still continue to elevate people with legitimacy because of their elected position, we run into a situation where we the media, capital big M media, are perpetuating these myths.
And can I just toss in a question there to Daniel or Ed? Did you want to leap in?
Yeah, can I just add on top of that? And again, I think this is something that and Ali, to your point, what we were talking about earlier is what is that balance between opinion and commentary? And I think the thing that I find also, to what I was trying to say with Kate, is that the lines for myself are really blurred between who's a pundit, who's an analyst, who is a journalist on the ground. Look at the recent controversy with Andrew Cuomo and Chris Cuomo, a huge conflict of interest between two people who should never be in the same room together. And look at what happened with, the handling of these elder care homes. Look at John Brennan, who works for MSNBC. I don't know, he's someone that was a former CIA head who, in a lot of the work, I don't know, is he a journalist or is he an analyst? And I think that, and we don't even need to talk about Fox News. And so I think, again, those distinctions were, I worked in broadcast media. I'm still confused, what everyone's stake is. Again, the way to get back to this is just report on real people on the ground and tell their stories, so it's not about us. And I think
so. Ed, let me just take that a little further. I am both a reporter and a commentator. Right, my show is absolutely a perspective show. It's completely an opinion show, and it's completely my opinion. I'm also a reporter, as you know. That's why I was next to you in Minneapolis. I report on hurricanes. I report on all sorts of things. I am both of those things. Neither of them is bad because I never lie to you. Lying is the bad part. Opinion's not the bad part. The distinction, the blurriness between commentary and news, I am 100% with you on that. What we should signpost everything. The thing at the bottom of the screen should just say, this is commentary, flashing lights. This guy is a commentator. I'm totally fine with that. It will cause me great problems because I am both of those things, but I am 100% honest all the time with my viewers. So we should be concentrated less on the blurriness between the two, which is an important point, and the distinction between liars and truth tellers. Truth tellers need to be deplatformed. Liars need to be deplatformed. Kate's exactly right. We can point fingers at Fox, But why we don't put Lauren Boebert on TV, that lunatic from Colorado? We don't put Marjorie Taylor Greene on TV because we've all agreed she's a conspiracy theory lunatic, and yet we'll put these other people on, senators and members of Congress, who seem normally okay, except that they've been fanning the flames of that myth that this was an election that was stolen. They're liars. Liars, bad. Truth tellers, good. Truth tellers with opinion should be in a different box than truth tellers who are giving you the news. But I think that we should leave this thing thinking we don't want liars. We want truth tellers in whatever box they come in.
But what's tricky about this is it's not just black and white. And even if you are telling the truth, you know, as a commentator, Ali, you just called somebody a lunatic.
I did.
That might be your truth. But that words have power, right? And so the language that opinion commentators are using, and some news reporters who don't fully identify themselves as opinion commentators are using, are adding to these divisions that dehumanize
but
in
it's the
others.
truth. What are we supposed to say about it? Are we supposed to peddle? Like, are we supposed to be accommodating of these people who spread conspiracy theories and lies?
I think we should be more accurate.
But I think
we cannot give them a platform. That's we cannot have them on air. That's the start. I think, no, again, Ali, like we're on the same page. And I guess what I'm just a little bit confused about is, like, if there's a cop and we're both standing next to each other and we both have a badge that says NBC, and, you know, they already are primed to be suspicious.
We're apparently both going to get shot.
And to the point of, like, what mistake did I make of being in the position that I am next to you, by the way, is the faith that, like, they would see us as completely objective. And so, like, I guess my question for you, Ali, is, can you hold those both spaces?
Well, I'm not objective. I'm not objective, and there's no cop's right to shoot me. I'm not objective. Police in America have a racism problem. They've got a police brutality problem, and I yell that from the top of the hills. If they don't like that, that's fine. They can argue with me. They can write letters to the editor. They can complain to my boss. They can give TV interviews. They can't shoot me, but they shot me.
I completely agree. I do still have to hold on to this fact, or this idea, or at least this idealism, that there is such a thing as truth, and that's different than opinion. And I don't know, maybe it's my upbringing as a wire journalist working for the AP starting out, but, like, I was always told, just like, my first job was at the Associated Press in Israel and the Palestinian territories. And there, every single day, you knew that there were two very real realities and space of narratives that were both real at the same time and both completely contradictory at the same time, to the point that the language you spoke, the words that you use, have a weight that would either elevate or compromise the reporting that journalists would do. And so that was the way that I was brought up as a journalist. And to not have opinion, not to say not to have opinions, but to really try to see every side of things. And I don't know how to reconcile the reality in which we have these opinions, and yet we expect that the people that we're trying to cover are supposed to see us as neutral. And again, I have no answers to this. And I think the bar has also been changing a lot, which is after George Floyd, after Me Too, we're definitely shifting the goalposts of, you know, like, what is white supremacy in, like, the media institutions, as we would say in Canada, settler colonial media, which we all are. You know, like, all these questions, like, we should absolutely be asking ourselves, but, like, I just don't know. And I'm just asking for everyone's advice. Like, how do we navigate this reality where we're having these conversations as to, like, how do we do this, but stay neutral? And I don't know, but I think that's the question I ask myself every day. And the only answer I have is, let's focus on the people. Let's focus on Trump supporters and people who have really real concerns, and elevate just the standard person you've never heard of.
And I just want to add that, in addition to focusing on Trump supporters, I think there needs to be greater representation of not just Trump supporters, right? That we need to diversify the people who are giving interviews. There needs to be more Black Americans on American TV, and you know, more diverse Canadians on Canadian TV. That until we have, I think what you saw in America was the normalization of white supremacy. And part of that, you know, this othering was this empowered feeling that they are right. You know, I'm being inarticulate here, but essentially, until we have greater representation of people who are not just white, and we have greater representation of stories that are not caricatures of Black people or stereotypes of Asian Americans, we're going to be stuck in these cycles where people don't see each other as full, rich humans. And it's a complex problem, and it's going to have a complex solution. And one part of that is making sure that all of the people who are affected by these things have a voice and a place in solving the problem, because we all contributed to getting here, right?
I feel like we've been listening to part masterclass and part therapy session because we've opened up some wounds here that I think we need to keep talking about. But I cannot thank you enough for your questions, for your answers, for your vulnerability, for your thoughtfulness, and for your dedication to speaking truth to power. All of you are exceptional, and I know you don't have the time to do what you just did for us, but we very much appreciate it. Protecting free expression knows no borders. So we're very glad you made time for us. Thank you very much. And to that end, I do need to turn this over to my friend here, because I have to go do the
You
next.
got work to do, Adrienne.
So, okay, thank you. Take care, everybody.
Adrienne,
Bye.
thank you so much. Bye. Thank you so much for hosting tonight's event and for your continuous support of the CJFE. And on behalf of CJFE and Committee to Protect Journalists, thanks and gratitude to our panelists, Daniel Dale from CNN, Jameel Jaffer from the Knight First Amendment Institute at Columbia University, Ed O, photojournalist and documentary filmmaker, Ali Velshi from MSNBC, and Kate Woodsome from The Washington Post. We know that we can count on all of them to continue to speak truth to power. I want to tell you that this program was produced by dedicated, when I say dedicated, they're dedicated, a dedicated group of CJFE board members and volunteers. And we couldn't have done this without the support of Rosa DeMonte, Frank Switzer, Michelle Shepard, Yet Belgraver, Nala Ayed, Jean Armstrong, and Carol Off. Special thanks to Dino Harum Basic for those great videos. And on behalf of the CJFE, I want to thank our sponsors, Reuters, the editorial cartoonist Michael Deatter, and Green Living, who provided creative and technical support. If you want to help CJFE continue its work to defend free expression and protect those with the courage to speak and report the truth, please consider becoming a member. And a final reminder, you can purchase prints by the editorial cartoonist Michael Deatter. And finally, thanks to you, the audience. We hope you enjoyed the program. And along with everyone from CJFE, we trust that you too will continue to speak truth to power in your own way. You can reach out to us through our website or via Twitter at CJFE. You can stay tuned for details on our next event. Thank you very much. I'm Nanaba Duncan, and good night.